First of all, welcome to everybody. We are so glad that you're joining us. We are broadcasting from NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, and we're here to be able to celebrate the moon and moon rocks, Apollo to Artemis, with our featured speaker, Dr. Juliane Gross. Now, we will stay on the line for the next hour and then another 15 minutes if there's additional questions that come in. But I want to welcome all of you from so many different parts of the world, 29 different states and 6 countries. You might notice yourself on this map somewhere. We're so excited to start off this September and this perhaps school year for many of you by having you join us on today's webinar. We also really want to welcome our speaker, of course, and our facilitators. We have folks on the line, including myself, Rosina Miller, Suzanne Foxworth, and Kim Willis, who are part of our science engagement team, and we're looking forward to interact with you. But we also have some specialists, Andrea Mosey and Jeremy Kent, who work with Juliane Gross in the lunar lab. So if you have questions about the moon, moon rocks, and things like that, Andrea and Jeremy are more than able to give you some answers to questions you may have. Now, you might be thinking, oh, why are we celebrating the moon and moon rocks today? Well, actually, we celebrate the moon and moon rocks every day. But there's a special day on September 14th, 2024, and it's International Observe the Moon Night. Every year, there's this international sort of focus on the moon where we can celebrate the moon, observe and look up from people all around the world. And that's one of the things that we encourage you to do on September 14th and really every day. Now, if you want more information about Observe the Moon Night, or you even want to see if there are events happening this Saturday, you can go to moon.nasa.gov/observe, and you can check out some additional materials and information that they have available. But for us today, we're going to celebrate the moon and moon rocks by hearing from our speaker, Dr. Juliane Gross. We are so happy to have her here today to share her passion, her expertise, her knowledge, and herself with all of you. So with that, I want to welcome Dr. Juliane Gross.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm really excited to talk to you and talk to you about my favorite subject, which is the moon and moon rocks. So we're going to talk a little bit about Apollo and then also Artemis, since those missions are coming up soon. But before we start, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Dr. Juliane Gross, and I really like rock climbing. And I like traveling. So here's a picture of me in Antarctica. I was there for two and a half months to collect space rocks. I also like painting, and I'm a planetary geologist or a planetary scientist. And that means I study planetary bodies like the Earth or like Mars, but especially like the moon, and figure out how these planetary bodies form. Now, you might have noticed that I have a little bit of an accent. That is because I was born and raised in Germany. So that's where the little red star is right there. And that's where I'm from. I went to school in Germany. This is a picture of me here on my first day of elementary school. I was very excited, as you can see. And so I went through the entire school system in Germany, and then I went to university in Germany, got all my degrees, and then ended my education journey with a PhD. So I became a doctor of rocks in geology. So I'm a rock doc, which is really fun to say. And then after I got my PhD, that is when I moved to the United States. So I became a postdoc, somebody who's finished their doctor. And I worked at the Lunar and Planetary Institute here in Houston, Texas. And that was the first time I got in contact with moon rocks. And I loved it so much that I wanted to continue to study the moon forever. So then became a research scientist in New York City at the American Museum of Natural History. Some of you might have been there. Maybe we have some people online here from that region. So here's a picture of AMNH. I was there for a couple of years. And then I got hired by Rutgers University in New Jersey as a professor for planetary sciences. So I was a professor teaching students for about 8 years until last year. NASA hired me as the Artemis curation lead. And so now I'm back basically where I started, back in Houston, Texas, helping getting NASA ready to go back to the moon and returning new samples from the moon, new rocks. So that was about me. Now I'm going to ask you guys a question. Why do you think we care about the moon? And while you will ponder that question, I will talk a little bit about why we as humans and maybe people who inherit Earth care about the moon. And then we'll come back to those questions. And I'm very excited to hear what you think about it. Okay. So we care about the moon because it turns out it stabilizes the Earth axis. So here is where we have our vertical line, and then Earth is tilted by 23.5 degrees. And that's why we have seasons, right? The moon, turns out, stabilizes that tilt. So Earth is not wobbling constantly. And that's really great because then life on Earth can evolve over a long time period. Other planetary bodies like Mars, they don't have large moons like we do. Mars has two tiny moons, but they're not big enough to stabilize Mars. So you can see the vertical line here again. Sometimes Mars is only tilted just a very little bit, and then it starts to wobble. It's tilted more, so that's pretty similar to what Earth tilt is. But sometimes it almost flips on its side. And so now the equator region that used to be the equator now suddenly freezes over and almost becomes the poles. And then it flips back. And so Mars wobbles back and forth. And that's not very good for life, for example, to develop on any planetary body. So we are really lucky having the moon. One of the reasons to really celebrate the moon, it helps us humans and any other life on our planet. But I want to know why you care about the moon. Why is the moon important to you? Or why do you think it might be important to Earth, other than that it stabilizes our axis? Maybe it's important to your friends. Maybe it's important to animals. So if you can put your answers in the chat, I would love to hear from you why the moon is important to you or everybody around you. What do you guys think? And then
Awesome.
we'll take
So
some
if in the chat, if you want to include your school or organization name, we'll read some of these answers out and hopefully be able to acknowledge folks, because Juliane is very interested to know why you think the moon is important or why it's even special to you. And we love to have folks interact with us. So we'll see if we get any answers in the chat as far as why people are excited or feel like the moon is important. Oh, and we've got from Frank Planetarium, one individual mentions that baby turtles use it after they
Yes.
hatch. We'll see
Yes.
if there's other information that comes in. That's a great tidbit for those of you that were perhaps unaware of that. Duxbury Senior Center says it's just a constant presence in the sky. It varies and it poses questions, which is a great answer. One of our solar system ambassadors from Louisiana says it's a great jumping off step to the solar system and beyond. So another very interesting set of inputs in the chat. We'll see if there's anything else that comes in from folks that might be sort of thinking and pondering. And I tell you, I'm so glad to have some of this input because the baby turtles,
Yes.
totally wasn't even thinking about that. But that's something to really recognize. So we have other things. One of our solar system ambassadors says it's the most accessible celestial body. And as an astronomer, they love observing it through a telescope. And it's a wonderful STEM outreach object for the public engagement. Another gal from a middle school is saying that, where did this go? I love to know that we've had humans visit there, and a little bit about the tides since they are in Jacksonville, Florida. Solar System Ambassador from Texas says the moon is important because it helps control those tides. Evergreen Institute says it's thought to be once part of the early Earth. So studying it, we can learn more about Earth. U.S. Space and Rocket Center says all students are somewhat familiar with the moon and it's a great hook to interest them in space. Also, the Apollo program was huge for Huntsville. And then we have from Frank Planetarium, it's an orbit that circles our planet, no strings attached. So, Juliana, some great answers and more are coming in, but I'll turn things over to you. What do you think?
That is fantastic. All these answers are so wonderful and they're all right. Like, you guys are really, really great. I love the baby turtles. But yes, you guys are right. There are a million reasons to really celebrate the moon and why the moon is important for us. And so, just going to summarize basically what you guys already said, right? We do care about the moon because we have these big picture questions, right? Like, how how does a planetary body work? How do we go from like a solar nebula that I'm sure you guys have seen pictures of it, like the new James Webb telescope is taking wonderful pictures of nebulas, and Hubble has been taking pictures. How do we go from that to something that collapses, starts rotating, and then we have a swirling disk of dust and gas to a solar system with a star in the center, in our case, the sun, and planets? What are the building blocks of these planets, right? How are some planets are different than others? How old is our own solar system? How old is our own Earth, right? How did that happen? Where's life coming from, right? Does it originate on Earth? Or maybe was it brought to Earth? Why do we have so much water? Where's that coming from? So we have all these really big picture questions about planets and the solar system that, geologists, when they walk around a planet like Earth and they pick up rocks, they can start answering some of these questions. But if we look at Earth, right, Earth is really special. And if you're a planetary geologist, Earth is maybe not the greatest planet in our solar system, although it's really cool. But our planet is covered with a lot of water, right? You can see all the blue here. We have green areas, right? We have a lot of fauna and flora. We have wind. We have an atmosphere, good for us, right? We have wind and rain and snow and ice. But we also have something that is called plate tectonics, right? The crust is sort of separated and it moves. And so this plate tectonic means that a lot of this stuff gets recycled. Earth is basically a gigantic recycling machine. We have like the ocean areas with their crust that gets sort of shoved back into the interior of Earth, where these rocks start to remelt. They make magma that then gets extruded onto the surface through volcanoes, right? We're building mountain ranges. And then we have the atmosphere with the wind and the rain and the sun and the snow and the ice, and that starts to break the rocks apart into like smaller pieces, into sediments, into dust. And then that gets transported through wind or rivers and eventually lands up back in the ocean and settles down. And then the whole thing starts again. We're starting to shove things back into the interior where it melts. And every time you have a rock and it crystallizes and is solid in an environment and you expose that to a different environment, whether that is ice or rain or pressure or heat when it goes back into the interior, that rock is starting to lose some of that information that that rock contains. Um, and so Earth is a gigantic recycling machine, and only the short term history of our planet is recorded in rocks from Earth. If we want to learn something about the early Earth, how Earth looked like millions and billions of years ago, and how other planets may be formed, and what the building blocks are, including Earth's building blocks, then we have to go to a place that hasn't really changed much since its formation, right? And that is the moon. It's our nearest neighbor, and it's the best, as you guys already said, the best and most accessible place in the solar system to study planet altering processes that have shaped our little tiny corner of the universe, including Earth. And that is why the moon is a museum, right? And so I of course want to like to compare it to the museum that I worked at the American Museum of Natural History. The moon is just like that. And if you go into any natural history museum, you will see artifacts that tell you the story about early humans, or it tells you the story about the dinosaurs, right? And so you can learn a lot by just going to the museum and looking at the artifacts. Well, the moon has artifacts too. And those are the rocks, and they tell stories. So sometimes we refer to the moon as an archive because it's covered in rocks, right? So it's a museum of planetary history and also an archive. And so all these rocks contain stories just like books. So sometimes we refer to them as rock books. And because the moon does not have an atmosphere, These rocks have been interacting with the solar system climate for 4.5 billion years, and they have recorded the solar system climate for that time period. So all we have to do as scientists is go pick up these rocks and then learn how to read this archive. We have to sit down with every single rock and try to extract the stories that these rocks contain. So that's the fun part about being a scientist. So between 1969 and 1972, we did go to the moon. This is a picture from Apollo 11 where they only had their feet to walk around. And this is a picture of Apollo 17 where you can see the rover tracks. So the later missions, they had little moon buggies that they could drive around on the lunar surface and explore bigger areas. And so we brought back 382 kilograms of rocks and soil. So here's an example of a really big, nice rock. I wish they would have brought back that rock, but it was slightly too big for their spacecraft. So you can see the astronauts right here. Just like normal geologists, they have geology tools. So you can see a rock hammer here. A lot of the tools were on long grabbers, on long sticks, because it's really hard to bend down once you're in this like bulky spacesuit. But they were able to break little pieces off these samples of these rocks and put them in little bags and then eventually bring them back to Earth. Now, when we studied these samples from these Apollo missions, we learned that at some point the moon was covered in a global magma ocean. The entire moon was molten. And that happened when there were two protoplanets that smashed into each other, they collided, they mixed, and then the central part cooled to form the Earth, and the debris cloud coalesced and cooled to form the moon. So once upon a time, the moon was covered by a global magma ocean. Everything was melted. Once you have a global magma ocean with any liquid, if you start to cool that liquid, things will start to crystallize. So if you have liquid water and you start to cool it down, eventually you'll start making ice crystals, right? And eventually, if you cool it further, the entire water will be ice. So on the moon, we started to crystallize minerals. And if the minerals were denser than the rest of the melt, they started to sink and they formed the core and the mantle. And if the minerals were less dense, they started to float to the surface. Like if you have ice crystals, they're less dense than your water, and then they float to the surface, right? And so these are the less dense minerals called anorthite. And there you can envision them as like rockbergs swimming on this magma ocean. And eventually, over time, they formed the first crust of the moon. And so the rock is white because the mineral is white. And because it is made up of mostly anorthite, we call this rock anorthosite. Doesn't really matter what we call it, but remember it's white, right? So that was 4.5 to 4.4 billion years ago when that happened. Very, very long time ago. Well, the moon doesn't have an atmosphere, so everything that starts falling down onto the moon makes an impact, right? And there was a lot of debris early on. So the moon got peppered with asteroids and meteorites and stuff like that, and it started to make craters. So every time you impact that crust, you start to break it into pieces, and then that impact melt starts to glue it back together, and then there's another one, and you break that up again, and then you glue it back together, and so on. And so the surface got reworked, and the rock type that we can build with that is called a breccia. And it's basically a rock made out of little pieces of other rocks. So you can see the breccia here from Apollo 16. You can see some of the black rocks in there and white rocks, right? So if we go back to the book, right, this rock book contains 1 million short stories. So if you're really interested in learning about the moon and finding all sorts of treasures, then this is your treasure trove. This is my favorite rock type from the moon. It's a breccia. But then over time, the interior of the moon remelted, and that melt found its way through the cracks and filled the craters that were empty. So you can think of them as lava lakes, and then they cooled to form basalt. And that rock is black, right? So if we look into the night sky, and I think next week, Tuesday on the 17th, is the full moon. So if you look into the night sky at the next full moon, remember the dark areas here? Those were the former craters that got filled with lava, and then they cooled to make basalt. And you can still see the round shape of these craters. Some are a little bit degraded. Here's a really nice round one. You can see the big one still here, right? And these areas are dark because the rock is black that come from that. The rest of the moon is so bright in our night sky because guess what? That's the white rock, right? And the breccia is in between everywhere. So where do we store these moon rocks, right? We have 382 kilograms, and they are stored here at NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. This is what JSC looks like. And I'm sitting right here in this little building. That's where my office is. And the moon rocks are stored right next door. This is building 31, and you can see there are no windows. And that is because we are building, the building was built in a way that it could withstand hurricane force number 4 out of 5. As you all know, we do have hurricanes. You could also submerge this entire building underwater and it would still be waterproof and nothing could happen to the rocks. So if we go into this building, you will see that there's a big vault. It's in a clean room, which means you have to wear a special suit. We call this a bunny suit. And then you can see me open the vault door here. It's just like a bank vault. It's a really, really thick, heavy door. And then if you go in there, this is what it looks like. This is the inside of the vault. So we have these cabinets in there. You can see Andrea sitting right here. And then there's Jeremy right here carrying a tray, who are online with us today. And if we do a close-up of these cabinets, you can see their little trays in here, right? There, here are the trays. And so this says AP16. So this is an Apollo 16 glove box. Now inside the glove box, there's nitrogen gas. There's no air, it's nitrogen gas, because nitrogen does not interact with the rocks. Remember I said every time you take a rock out of its original environment and you expose it to something different, it will start losing part of the story that it contains, right? Moon rocks don't have an atmosphere, so they're technically under vacuum, but we can't really store them under vacuum. It's really expensive and kind of dangerous. So instead, we're doing the second best thing. We store them in a gas that cannot or doesn't want to interact with the moon rocks, right? So we were trying to protect the moon rocks from us. And you can see we have these gloves where we can stick our hands in so we can pull out these trays. And then if we open one of the trays, this is what you would find on the inside. There's a little piece of rock, right? There's another of the black rocks. And this one, you can see it has little holes poked in. So these are fossilized gas bubbles. So that's really exciting. The rocks themselves are in bags, in Teflon bags. And inside the bags, we also have nitrogen atmosphere, nitrogen gas, just in case. And that's how we can take them out. So what have we learned from these rocks, right? So here's a pile of rocks. Uh, so these Apollo rocks can be used to calibrate our spacecrafts that fly today around the moon. These spacecrafts, they look at the light that gets bounced off the surface from the moon. So the sunlight that shines on the surface comes in and then interacts with the rocks. And the minerals in the rocks, they will absorb certain wavelength. And then the light that gets bounced off the moon has changed. And the spacecraft can measure the difference. And what that means is it can basically sense the chemistry, and it can make really beautiful maps. And I'll show you one of those maps of the surface of how different elements are distributed on the lunar surface. That's one thing that we need those rocks for. We can also date these rocks. So if we pick them up and we know exactly where they're coming from on a crater, we can date them and then we know exactly how old that crater is. So we've done that a lot with the Apollo samples, and we counted all the craters on the lunar surface. And it turns out that early on in the history of the Earth Moon, there was a period of time where there were tons and tons of impacts happening and cratering the lunar surface and also the Earth because they were really close together. And once that died down, guess what happened on Earth? That's when life on Earth started to develop. So here's a little picture. Here's where the Earth-Moon system starts or originate, and there's this heavy bombardment by comets and meteorites and asteroids on the lunar surface and the Earth. And then once that sort of stopped, that is when we can find the earliest life forms on Earth, and we find them in rocks, right? And so that's a really cool rock that contains a really cool story. We think maybe life tried to start to emerge earlier on Earth, but it got beaten down every single time there were more of these impacts happening. So by learning about Apollo samples and how old they are, we can learn about when life on Earth started. We can also look at some other characteristics of how heavy they are, how dense the rocks are, and then we can interpret global mission data sets. So this was a mission that looked at the subsurface of the moon. And then the chemistry of the rocks, that's how you can unravel all the stories that these rocks contain, whether it's stories about volcanism or volcanoes on the moon, or a story about the magma ocean or the different layers of the moon. There are magnetic minerals in these rocks, and they tell us about if the moon once had a magnetic field. And we all know magnetic fields are really important because they shield us from solar radiation, right? Earth has a very strong magnetic field. Turns out the moon at some point had a magnetic field too, but it died very, very quickly. And then the Apollo samples also helped us understand that we have meteorites from the moon. So those are pieces that got blasted off the surface and eventually landed on Earth. And then that's when I went to Antarctica, for example, to pick up some of these rocks. But there are other stories that are contained in these rocks that help us understand our place within our own galaxy. So the surface interacts with the solar wind, but also with galactic cosmic X-rays. And so by studying these, we can figure out how our position in our galaxy has changed over time. So really, we have a wealth of information that we're trying to extract from these rocks, right? They're fantastic books. We just have to learn how to read them. So if we already know everything, or we know so much, and we have learned so much about the moon and the Earth, do we really need to go back to the moon? What do you guys think? Yes, no? And tell me why. You can put your answers in the chat.
Excellent. So here's where, again, if you want to start or provide your school or organization as you give us your input, that would be awesome. And the why is really important as far as this question goes. So do we need to go back to the moon? Yes or no, and why? And I'm very much looking forward to some very insightful answers. We'll see what we have that comes in. So we do now, and if you want to change your organization, you have to log out and log back in, putting in your name, or you can just say Solar System Ambassador, whatever state. So that is an option for folks. So Frank Planetarium says, yes, we have to go back to the moon to practice for long duration missions. Another solar system ambassador in Maui says to check out ice at the South Pole. So we'll see what other answers might come in, but it looks like some of our individuals on the line here have some background knowledge that hopefully they're building more and more as we go through this. We'll see if any other answers come in terms of do we need to go back to the moon, yes or no, and why? Frank Planetarium again says resources, and there's a lower escape velocity, perhaps for further exploration of our solar system. Our solar system ambassador from Illinois says a colony on the moon to be able to get elsewhere, and we've explored so little of the moon. From Louisiana, our solar system ambassador says, yes, we need to go back to use material on the moon's surface to construct habitats. Duxbury Senior Center says, absolutely sure. We've only just started to study the moon. We should also be able to use the moon as a starting point to go to other planets. Also build astronomical bases to study what we can't study here. Our solar system ambassador from Texas says, yes, got to go back to the moon. We've only tasted the rock, so to speak. We need a full course meal. We also need a telescope on the dark side. Another individual says, a solar system ambassador says, their thoughts are, it would have been great to be constantly pursuing right after Apollo and beyond, but we are going back with Artemis. And our solar system ambassador from Illinois says, plus we need the somewhat quote unquote cheese, or I'll take that as we need more rocks. What do you think, Juliana?
Oh, those are fantastic answers. Yes, and I agree with all of them. Those are really, really, really good answers. So we'll expand a little bit on that. That's awesome. Yes. So, yeah. So here's the moon, right? And your 6 missions. And overlay, and this is the outline of the United States to scale. So the moon is actually kind of like small, even though it's one of the larger moons compared to our own planet, the ratio. But if I were going to give you I'm going to give you 6 missions, and then you land 4 of them in the United States, and I guess 2 of them, this will be Canada. And then you're allowed to collect 382 kilograms of rocks, right? And then I want to know from you how the Earth formed, or what rock types you can find on the Earth. Would you be able to answer that question? The answer is probably no, because you're missing a lot of different rock types, right? You have not collected rocks down here from Texas. You don't know what those looks like, right? You haven't picked up rocks from Germany. You don't know what that looks like. You have not picked up rocks from the Saharan Desert or from the Amazonian rainforest or from Antarctica, right? You're missing a lot of cool places um, on Earth. And so the same holds true for the moon. We've only visited a very small area, as you guys pointed out. Then there's another reason. So here's a picture of the moon. This is the side we always see, what's called the near side, right? With the basaltic, the dark areas, and then the highlands, the white rock areas. And outlined here in that white circle, this is where the Apollo samples were collected. This is the far side, the side that we never see, right? Sometimes it's referred to as the dark side, but it also gets light up, so it's not quite true. So we call it a far side. Now, remember I told you about the spacecrafts that orbit the moon and they look at the light that gets reflected off the surface, and then you can make these beautiful maps. You can color code the surface and it shows you the distribution of elements. So we've done that. And here is what you see. This is the map of the element iron. You can see where all these Apollo samples were collected. That is where there's a lot of iron. The rest of the moon doesn't really have that. Well, we can look at another map that the spacecraft made. This is an element called titanium. And again, where the Apollo samples are come from, there's a lot of titanium, but the rest of the moon doesn't have that. Now let's look at like a weird element. This is called thorium. This is a radioactive element. And again, where the Apollo samples come from, it lights up like a Christmas tree, but the rest of the moon doesn't really have that element, right? And so thorium is a rare earth element, which we abbreviate as REE. I could continue to show you these maps. We have a map like this for phosphor, which is P, and potassium, which is K. So here's K, potassium, and then P for phosphor. And if you spell that, it's an acronym that is called CREEP. So all the Apollo samples contain this CREEP. You could say Apollo samples are creepy. The rest of the moon is not, right? We don't quite understand where this component comes from. But the point here is that the Apollo samples are not representative. So if I give you 6 missions and you decide to land your 6 missions all in Yellowstone National Park, and then you collect all of your rocks from Yellowstone National Park, geologically speaking, you're getting some really cool rocks, right? There's like hydrothermally altered stuff. There's geysers, there's hot springs, there are bacteria, there's a supervolcano. You get really cool samples. But are they representative for the rest of the United States? The answer is no, because the rocks in your backyard probably look very different, right? The rocks here in Texas look very different. And so the same holds true. Apollo samples are not representative, right? And so that was over 50 years ago that we collected these, and we haven't really been back since. But nature is pretty cool. And so nature has provided us with additional rocks from the lunar surface that come from random areas, and those are meteorites, right? You can see how heavily cratered the lunar surface is. And so if the impact is big enough, it will throw off some rocks from that surface, will go into space, and then if the rock gets lucky, it gets captured by Earth gravity. It makes it through our atmosphere. This is what we know as shooting stars, right? And if it survives that and lands on the surface, then that is what we call a meteorite. And this is in the Saharan Desert. You can see the black rock. They melt a little bit when they go through the atmosphere, and that's why they appear so dark. And then we pick these up, we take pictures of them, we give them funny names and numbers, we have a scale in there, and then we can study them. So meteorites come from random areas on the moon. We think they come from sometimes also from the far side, probably some areas from like the South Polar region. But we don't know. We don't know for sure where they're coming from. We only know that they come from the moon, but we don't know exactly where they're coming from. And that is a problem, right? Why do we need to know where the rocks are from the moon? And in order to answer that question, we're going to play a game now. We're going to make an experiment. I'm going to tell you that moon rocks are like Lego blocks, and that a way scientists like me study these moon rocks is like building a Lego thing, a Lego object, right? So Apollo, we went to the moon and we picked up the rocks, so we knew exactly where they're coming from. So in order to build the object, I'm going to give you some Lego pieces. You can see them here. And I will tell you exactly where the Lego pieces are located in that finished thing that we're building, right? But I'm only giving you a few Lego pieces because remember, Apollo only visited a very small area that wasn't quite representative, right? So I'm giving you a piece of the bottom, maybe something center front. Here's another center front piece, and a little bit of the side and the back, right? So now the question would be, what object are we building? And why do you think that we're building that? Maybe we're building a beach house because this blue thing looks like a seat, right? Well, that could also be a car because you want to sit in a car. Maybe it's a boat because this bottom piece here looks more shaped like a boat, right? You need a car seat for a boat. So these are all good hypotheses. Maybe it's a spacecraft. I don't know. That side piece maybe looks like a wing. Who knows, right? Maybe we're building something completely different, right? Maybe we're building a coffee cup. I don't know, right? The problem is we're missing a lot of pieces, right? Cool. All right. So nature, right, gave us a way to get more pieces, but we don't know where they're coming from. So here are some extra Lego pieces that I'm giving you as a clue to what we're building, right? I'm giving you some more white blocks. And oh, hey, look, I gave you some red pieces. So now you know that the object we're building has more color. I also gave you something that maybe looks like a wheel right here. But I'm not telling you where these pieces go on this object. So now my question to you is, what do you think are we building? So you have to become the lunar scientist now with the few pieces that you have available. You need to come up with a hypothesis and tell me why you came up with that hypothesis. What are we building? What do you guys think? Put your answers
All
in the
right.
chat.
So let's see what creative minds, what scientific minds are out there in terms of you've got these Lego pieces and you're trying to piece together what is Juliana building here. So we love your hypothesis as to what you think is being built here, as well as why you think it. So we have an answer that came in. Someone says a boat because of that bottom front piece. So they're thinking that that is, got some perhaps geometry or its shape makes this individual believe we're looking at perhaps a boat. Let's see
Correct.
if
Yeah.
any others might have thoughts about what you may be building. And so we have some additional answers and give us the why you believe it might be what you're thinking it is. So someone else is saying possibly a boat, they'd flip that bottom piece. So you're not saying the orientation of that bottom piece, but they're
Hmm.
thinking could be a boat, and flipping that bottom piece. That's one of the key things there.
Hmm.
And this is a great analogy in terms of piecing together information based on little tidbits. So you don't have the whole story, but you're trying to piece it together. And this is a great analogy for how this scientific process may work. We'll see if any other answers might come in. Oh, I'm seeing, look, perhaps a firehouse with red, white, and black.
Yeah.
That might be something based on the coloration. One of our solar system ambassadors from Texas is saying not enough wheels yet for a car. Maybe one of our citizen scientists is saying possibly a spacecraft, or some type of thing that has a seat. So do you have a follow-on question for folks,
Yeah, so
Juliana?
these are all fantastic hypotheses, and I agree with all of them, right? And this is what we as scientists do. We get these puzzle pieces, and then we're trying our best with these puzzle pieces to come up with a hypothesis. Could be a boat. I agree that bottom piece totally looks like a boat. Looks like there's a wheel somewhere, but is it a wheel or is it a steering wheel? We don't know, right? This blue thing looks like a seat. So all of y'all's answers are fantastic, right? So really what we need um, is more information. And that is the beauty of Artemis, right? So if these are Apollo rocks and meteorites, we have pieced together all these hypotheses of how the moon formed, how the Earth formed, what happened to the Earth-Moon system over a lifespan of 4.5 billion years to today, right? But we're piecing these stories together with information that is not, we don't have all the information yet, right? We don't have all the puzzle pieces. So now we're going back to the moon with Artemis, and we can target specific pieces to help us answer or test our hypotheses. So my follow-up question to you is, which piece, or maybe 2 or 3 pieces of Lego, would you need to help you confirm your hypothesis? For example, if you think maybe it's a car, you would want the bottom pieces to see if there are more than one wheel. Or maybe you want the piece from the center because that might be a steering wheel, right? If you think this is a boat, maybe you want a piece from the top so you can see if there's a sail, right? So which pieces would you want to have, right? If you could pick 3 Lego pieces, or one, doesn't matter, which pieces would you want to have? The top pieces, maybe a front view, maybe the bottom view. Tell me what you need.
And let us know in the chat. We'll do this for just a moment or so because we do have about 15 minutes before the top of the hour. And I know Juliana has a lot more to be able to share. So Frank Planetarium say they want more of the front. One of our
Yeah.
solar system ambassadors says the bottom and the back end is what they would like to see to be able to better confirm their hypothesis.
Hmm.
And so the more pieces you have, the more you can better decipher. Now, the solar system ambassador from Texas says, I want motor pieces if there is some type of motor. So they want to see if there's things like that.
Yeah,
So what say you, Juliana?
that sounds fantastic. All right, so we're going back with Artemis and we're going to pick up the key pieces. We know exactly where they're coming from and they are more representative. So now I gave you a piece of the front, gave you a piece of the top, gave you a piece of the back. There are more pieces here in the back. Maybe that's an engine. I gave you more pieces of the side. Look at that. Could be a wing, right? Guess what are we building? Guys, quick, in the chat, 30 seconds. Now that we tested hypotheses and we have more pieces that are more representative and they are key pieces, what are we building?
And I'm immediately seeing things like space shuttle, spacecraft, and orbiter. Clark Planetarium says the shuttle, an F-16, an
Yeah,
EIE shuttle. So what are we building?
that's fantastic. Those are all fantastic answers. And you're right. This is what we're building. It's a space shuttle, right? So, with going back with Artemis and picking up key rocks, we can test our hypotheses, right? We're still missing critical information. We, for example, missed that there was like a little spacecraft inside the space shuttle. We missed the sticker, right? But we were able to really tighten down our hypothesis and test this. And so that's why we're going back with Artemis. We want to definitely go back to the moon. We want to bring back these key samples and test our hypotheses about how the Earth and the moon formed, right? Because those are testable hypotheses. We also want to go back, and you guys have pointed this out before, because we want to make sure where we can find and use the water that we think exists there for long-term exploration, right? It's good for drinking. You can split hydrogen and oxygen. You can breathe stuff. You can make rocket fuel out of it. And we want to learn to live and operate independently on a planet other than Earth so we can know what to expect if we want to go and travel into the solar system, right? We want to test all these technologies before we start sending people to Mars. Mars is 8 months away. It's a really long time. The moon is only 3 days away, right? So let's do this in a better environment where we can get to quicker. We can get people off that planetary body quicker than Mars, right? So we've learned a lot from Apollo going forward to Artemis. And so Artemis will land the first woman and the first person of color near the moon's south pole by mid to late 2020, right? And the lunar south pole, and some of you guys have already said that in the chat, is really special. Let's see if I can make this video go. Because the moon is not tilted. And so on the poles, the sun angle is really, really low. So the sun just hovers around the horizon. And that means the shadows at that in the pole regions are really, really long. And so some of these craters have really high rims. And so these rims make shadows that are so long that there are areas in the south polar region that have never seen the sun in their entire lifetime. And so I have a video here. It's more zoomed in, and so you can see these two craters here, crater floor, they don't have ever seen sunlight. And so this is what we call permanently shadowed regions. They are so cold. They are as cold as minus 414 Fahrenheit. It's just a few degrees above absolute zero. That's a death trap for anything that is a gas or a liquid. It immediately freezes out, right? So we have these spacecrafts and they actually have mapped, right? We can also map for water, not just an element, but here's a map for water. And you can see we're looking down on the South Pole now. See these craters, these are the permanently shadowed regions, all the little blue dots, that's where we think the water is in the form of ice. We don't know exactly. We don't know how much there is, and we don't know where it is located. It could be in frost form, right? Like snow. It could be as discrete horizon right underneath the surface. It could be bound to mineral grains. We don't quite know. So we really need to go and send people there to tell us where the water is located and how much there is and how it is distributed. But I also showed you these maps before, and it turns out, so this is the region down here where we're going on the near side, near the South Polar region. We picked the near side so we can still talk to Earth, right? And that region is way more representative than the rest of the moon. So we can go and pick up these key rocks, not just the water and the ices, but also the key rocks to help us understand, for example, why Apollo is so weird, right? So how do we do this? So how are we getting ready for this? Well, we're currently already training the first crew. This is the Artemis 2 crew. Here's a picture of them. Here's Reed, this is Victor, this is Christina, and here's Jeremy. And they're going to be the first humans after 50 something years who are going to go and fly around the moon. So they're going to take lots of pictures. I'm one of their teachers, so just like I talked to you guys today, I sometimes talk to the Artemis 2 crew and I teach them all about the moon. And what the moon looks like from orbit and what kind of rocks they have on the surface. And then we take them also out into the field. This is a picture in Iceland. Jeremy is like breaking off a little piece of this big boulder here with the geology tools. Um, we also simulate moonwalks. Sometimes we put them in these, like, they're not quite spacesuits, but they're simulated spacesuits. And then we send them out in the desert. You can see they're using the little shovels and there's a bag. So they practice how to use the tools. And sometimes we do that at night and then we put a big light out there that simulates the sun that is just at the horizon. So these night moonwalks simulate the really difficult lighting conditions that the astronauts will experience on the moon. We also do tests inside a big swimming pool. You can see here, this is Trevor inside of the suit and like is using some of the geology tools. You can see one of the security divers hovering in the back. And then we're also testing and practicing how we as the science people talk to the astronauts while they're on the surface. So in this test, you can see me sitting here at that computer. The astronauts were in Arizona doing their field training. And we talked to them and practiced how to talk to them and help them understand which rocks they should pick up. But we're also testing how we can open and analyze the new samples that are returned from the moon. So during Apollo 17, 52 plus years ago, NASA decided to keep some of these samples stored away for the next generation. And so in 2019, we opened one of these never opened before samples to practice what it would look like, what it feel like and be like once Artemis brings back new samples, because we haven't done that in a really long time. So we need to relearn all of these things. And you can see me here. This is my colleague, Dr. Francesca McDonald, and we are trying to extract some gas that we thought might be in the sample. Here's where we first opened that drive tube. This is what the rocks and the soil looks like on the inside. This is when we finished pushing that soil out onto this cart. Here's Andrea, who's also online today. She's my favorite person. And this is Cherise Kreischer, and there's myself. We were the three women who got to do this, which was really, really awesome. And then we go and dissect the core and we put it in little pieces and we put it in little sample containers, and then they get shipped out to other researchers who then can extract all the stories that are contained in there. And of course, NASA is doing a lot more. This is just from what we do from a science perspective, right? There's a lot of engineers that are starting to build rockets. There are contractors out there that are doing a lot of the work. We're a lot of policy people helping us, right? There's a lot of people involved with getting us ready to go to the moon. So what can we learn from Apollo? By doing all of this for Artemis, right, with all these test runs, we can learn how to correctly collect or really well collect surface samples on the lunar surface without contaminating these samples, right? Remember, we want to protect those samples from us. We will learn how to transport them into the lunar orbit and then all the way back to Earth, how we do the splashdown and then extract the samples from the capsule, and then ultimately how we can bring them back to Houston, Texas, where they will come here into our Apollo lab, and then we will open them for the very first time and start examining them. So that means we need you guys. You are the next generation of people who will be alive to see other people walk on the moon. I'm personally super excited about this because I don't think any of us were necessarily alive during Apollo. So this is our first time we're going to get to see people walk on the moon, right? So we need your help. You could, maybe you like computers and you're a good computer modeler, or you like to program computers. We need you. We need people who like math. We need scientists, all sorts of not just geologists. We need all sorts of scientists, right? We need engineers. We need astronauts. Maybe some of you guys will become astronauts. If you do, let me know, because I have a list of rocks that I want you to bring back, right? We need artists to help us, right? This is a picture from an artist that was made what we think Artemis might look like in the future. We need educators, right? Like this fantastic team that is helping today. We need journalists to talk about and tell the stories of the rocks. We need architects to help build us things on the lunar surface. We need food scientists, right? What is the best food that the astronauts should eat? We need biologists and lawyers to help us talk to other countries who also want to go to the moon. We need visionaries. Hey, we can use the moon as a launching spot to go to Mars and other planetary bodies. If you like money, we need budget analysts. We need people who are really good with money to help us figure things out, right? So come work with us. And I would be so excited if in a couple of years from now, I will see you in some of my meetings and I get to work with you. That will be fantastic. So the future is as bright as the moon. Um, and I'm very excited that I got to share my love and my celebration of moon and moon rocks with you guys. And I want to thank you for your attention and answering all these awesome questions and all these amazing answers that you gave me. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It is so great to have heard so much about the moon, moon rocks, Apollo, and looking forward to Artemis. So thank you so much, Juliana, for all of your time and your expertise. And there are some folks that were around during Apollo, but some of the younger generation, I'm sure some of those students in classrooms were certainly not around if they're in a classroom, unless perhaps they're a teacher during those Apollo days. But Apollo was so exciting. Artemis is so exciting. And so if folks have questions that they would like to ask, uh, Juliana, put those in the Q&A. We'll go through as many questions as we can. I know we're about 4 minutes to the top of the hour, so if you do need to depart, we so appreciate your participation and you joining us today. We hope you've learned a lot, and there's so much to look forward to. And I'm going to go right over to the Q&A because I do know, and I saw that there are some questions that are specifically for you, Juliana. So let me see what I can find here. And again, keep your questions coming if you have them. We'll get to as many as possible, and do put them in that Q&A. So one particular question, you talked and you showed the Artemis 2 crew, who will fly around the moon.
Mhm.
But one of our participants from Frank Planetarium wants to know, do you have any idea when NASA might announce the Artemis 3 crew that might get selected? What are any thoughts on that?
I don't know the exact date when that is going to happen. I personally was hoping that it would happen around this time. Um, because I'm already sitting down to think about how we want to train them and what they need to learn about samples and rocks. Um, but they have not been announced yet. And the organization or the division that I work in is a science division. The office that works with the crew is the flight director office, and they make the schedule. Schedules are really complicated because going to space is really hard and complicated. There's a lot of factors that go in there. So they haven't announced it yet. I'm hoping it will be soon, but I really don't know.
And that is the nature of space flight. There's so much time and so much preparation that takes place. So we encourage you to keep your eye on the Artemis websites, NASA's Artemis websites, because that will be your best location for any new information that comes out about Artemis 2, Artemis 3, and beyond. So here's another question for you, Juliana.
Mhm.
Um, so if an individual right now is studying and getting a master's, can they work as a NASA scientist? How does one go about doing that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a lot of physicists that work at NASA, and we need people like that to calculate orbits and spacecraft orbits, and even in the science division, we have a lot of physicists in here. So I would look at internships. I think Paige has a link to a website where you can look at internships for grad students, where you could have an internship with NASA and you come to one of the science divisions here and then work with a scientist over a time period. Keep your eye out on job listings, and maybe Paige can post that as well. There's a USA job. Uh, a link where USA jobs are being posted for NASA. There's a lot of like what we call physical science positions that includes physics as well. We need those people to help us get ready for Artemis. And so there are several resources, and we'll post the links so that you can dive into that. But yeah, come work with us.
Awesome. So we'll ask our panelists to put some of those links in the chat, and we can also send them in a follow-up email as well.
Mhm.
Now, Clark Planetarium in Utah, they're wondering, from your point of view, Juliana, what would be something that you would be really excited to discover in the role that you have?
Oh, what I would want to discover. Well, I'm mostly excited about the rocks that we're bringing back. Um, from my own perspective, I would be so excited if we were going to bring back some rocks that are from the mantle of the moon, so from the interior, because we really have no idea what the mantle of the moon looks like. We, we think that maybe it looks similar to Earth mantle, which has a lot of like green minerals called olivine. Um, but that's just a guess. We really have no idea. Like we don't have any puzzle pieces from that at all. The South Polar region where we're going, on the far side, there's the biggest and deepest impact basin from the moon, and we think that maybe some of that material from the mantle got excavated and maybe deposited in the South Polar region where we're going, or it's what we're hoping. And so if we could find some green rocks, I would be so excited. There's also a mineral called spinel, which is pink. It's a pink, it's very, very beautiful. And sometimes we find these teeny, 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 tiny rock chips that are full of this pink mineral. So if we would discover a pink rock and then learn where that is coming from on the moon, I would be so excited. Um, those would be the for me personally as a scientist, the most two exciting rocks that we could potentially find.
And it's interesting because the folks that work in our lunar curation facility, Andrea and Jeremy, who are on the line, they get to work with moon rocks every day. And so some of these samples, I'm sure, would be samples that they would love to be able to work with, to be able to curate those samples and send those samples on to scientists to be able to do their research and studies on them. And so it's amazing how exciting rocks can be.
Yeah.
And I saw, Juliana mentioned the NBL, and I noticed that someone put in that the NBL may not be so great for simulating moonwalks, which aren't zero G. But one of the things that they are able to do is they can weight the folks that go into the NBL to simulate moonwalks, and they actually have sort of a lunar landscape at the bottom of the neutral buoyancy lab, and they're able to weight those folks so that they can practice using those tools, practice simulating moon rocks. So it's all about how they get weighted. So they are able to actually do, and I think Juliana showed an image of someone on the surface of the NBL
That's
in
right.
the water being
Yes.
able to do that simulated moon rock. So
Yeah.
how fun is that?
Correct. Yeah. And it's the best we can do at this point, right? We always also have to think about, short of going to space, this is sort of the second best we can do. And we have other means to sort of simulate things, which I didn't show. But yeah, the NBL is actually pretty cool.
Awesome. So here's a question from one of our participants in Louisiana.
Mhm.
How will the Artemis rock samples be sealed and preserved for the return trip? Can you talk to some of that?
Yeah. So during Apollo, the rocks were put in little Teflon bags and then just basically rolled up and with like clippers held, and then they were put in a big, what we call a sample return rock box. It was a big metal box where things were put in, and then that was sealed and then was put on the spacecraft and then returned. And so for Artemis, this will be very similar. We want to make sure that we are using the correct materials, so that again we're not contaminating our samples with stuff. And so we'll probably use very similar bags, and then the return sample boxes, they will be loaded onto the Orion spacecraft, and then that makes the trip back to Earth, and they'll land in the ocean somewhere. Um, and things will be safe in there and sealed, and then we'll take the crew out, and then we'll take the samples out right after. But we'll make sure that they're sealed and preserved so that they are safe from us, right? We don't want to contaminate them with us or our atmosphere or our water, because every time we do that, we're losing part of the story. So we'll take good care of that. All the details haven't been figured out yet, but we're working on it.
Awesome and great questions. And if you have additional questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A. We have about 5 to 10 minutes more where we can take advantage of having Juliana here so that we can see if she can answer any additional questions that we may have. So here's a question for you. You talked a little bit about um, using an Apollo sample, and you referred to it as an ANXA sample to be able to model some things for future Artemis samples. Can you talk a little bit more about how did this ANXA sample that you and two other women were primary folks opening that up? How was that useful?
Yeah, so we looked at what we call the drive tube. It's basically a core sample or something that gets hammered into the ground, and then filled with rock and soil, and then gets capped on both ends, and then returned to Earth. And NASA had the good foresight to store that for the future because they knew technology will evolve over time, and there are questions that we don't even know how to answer yet. Um, So then NASA put this program together called the Apollo Next Generation Sample Analysis Program, which abbreviated is called ANXA. And so they decided the time was right in 2019 to open one of these drive tubes so we could start and study it. A drive tube hadn't been open at that point for like a very, very, very long time. And a lot of the people who during the Apollo era worked on it are now retired or have died. And so as the next generation now is coming into the play, we have to relearn a lot of the things. We have to like learn from the more senior generation to help us understand what we're doing, right? And so the ANGSA project is connecting the Apollo generation with the Artemis generation, so we can learn from each other. And so we had to learn how to open these drive tubes and extract these samples very carefully. We had to learn about how to not contaminate them, how to keep everything really, really, really extra clean inside those nitrogen glove boxes. We had to learn how to communicate with each other. So it's not, it takes like three people to open this, and we all have to work together while we have our hands in the glove box. Um, so communication is a big thing that we had to go and learn. We had to learn how to reassemble the equipment from Apollo, right? So sometimes we were like, what is this? And we had to like figure out how to puzzle this back together. We had to find all the pieces from the equipment that we needed to open these new samples. And so it really helped us start thinking about what else do we need to get ready for when the samples come back. Do we need extra glove boxes? Do we need more people? Do we need extra equipment? And so that sort of helped us get the ball rolling to start thinking about the future and what we need to do to prepare for it.
And it's such an exciting thing to think about. And I don't know if Andrea, to put her on the spot, if she at all wants to share her camera, and I haven't given her more than about a second to think about this, but Andrea, if you would like to share your camera for a moment, to just share a little bit about, your work with Juliana and with ANGSA. And if you're not ready to do that, I totally understand. This was sort of putting you on the spot, but if you'd like to share, here she is. So I wanted to, Juliana actually said that Andrea is one of her favorite people. And I think Andrea is one of everyone's favorite people, and she can never retire.
Or
But
die.
Andrea,
She can
can
never
you
retire. She can never retire, and she can never die. That's the rule.
there you go. So Andrea, can you at least tell the folks, a little bit about how long you've been there at NASA's Johnson Space Center working in the lunar lab, so they have a little bit of perspective of you and your work?
Yes, I have been here for almost 50 years. I started right out of college, graduated from Houston-Tillotson in May of 75, and started working here in the Lunar Lab June the 2nd, 1975. But I was also here during the Apollo landing. Uh, I worked at NASA from the 10th grade through 12th grade, leaving. So I was here in 1969 for the Apollo mission, and I worked in Building 4 with the astronauts. And the group that I was actually working in was lunar missions. So my entire career here working for NASA and at NASA was surrounded by lunar samples. So I love working in the lunar lab. It's the only place that you can work on the amount, the quantity of lunar samples, samples brought from the moon anywhere in the world. And so it's really exciting. It was exciting when we opened that sample that had not been opened in 50 years. And
Yeah.
that was quite, when I look at that picture that you Yuli showed, it just does something. You just to see it for the first time that a
Mhm.
sample was opened that was brought from the moon in 1972, and we opened it a few years ago, and so that was a very exciting moment.
It was amazing.
Yes,
Yeah.
And
We had a good time in the lab.
yes.
and while Juliana has more or less recently joined the NASA family at the Johnson Space Center, Andrea, if you heard her correctly, or if you not sure if you heard her correctly, she has been working at this facility for over 50 years,
Almost 50. Well,
almost 50
I
years.
don't count the years when I were in high school. I started after I graduated from college in 75. But actually, yes.
And so when you love what you do,
You-
it's easy to keep going.
That's right.
exactly.
And if any of our other panelists, Jeremy Kent, who
Yay!
also works in the Lunar Lab, how long have you been working in the Lunar Lab, Jeremy?
I've been working here for 11 years now. I've learned a lot working under Andrea. She taught me how to process lunar samples, and it's a lot of fun as a geologist being able to work with actual moon rocks on a day-to-day basis. It's really kind of a dream come true. So just very happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, with that, it is almost 15 minutes past the top of the hour. Please leave your cameras on, Jeremy and Andrea, as well as Juliana. I want to take a moment to, first of all, and I think Andrea, did you want to add something in? Oh, you're muted.
I wanted to add the fact that Jeremy also worked in our thin section lab, and he did the thin sections for the cores that we provided.
And that thin section work is so very important and so very detailed, and one needs a whole lot of patience, from what I understand, to be able to process those things as well. So we have a great team at the Johnson Space Center and with our lunar curation facility. And I want to thank Andrea and Jeremy for helping to monitor the chat and put in answers in the Q&A. I want to thank all of you that have participated either live during this event or who are watching the archive. We want you to learn about the moon, celebrate the moon, and don't forget on Saturday during International Observe the Moon Night to look up at the moon and think about all the knowledge you have gained from our featured speaker, Dr. Juliana Gross. Juliana, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your experiment with the Legos, all of your knowledge, and the work that you do with a team, because no work is done alone. It's always done as a team. And we are grateful that we have such great team members, including Rosina, Suzanne, and Kim Willis, who are in the background. They haven't shared their cameras, but they're also a big part of us being able to share this webinar experience with all of you out there for the live event or for the archive. So Juliana, a huge thanks to you. Do you have any closing remarks for any of our folks?
Well, I just want to thank everybody who participated and came. You guys are the reason why we're doing this. And so we are very grateful that you all came. And again, I'm so excited that you guys are here, and maybe we will see some of you guys in the future in some of our meetings, and we'll get to work with you, which will be really fantastic. So keep us in the loop, and thanks for coming.
Awesome. And for any students out there, you are that next generation, like Juliana mentioned. So we look forward to you sitting in the seats where Andrea and Jeremy are, or even myself and the rest of our team. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.